Ian McKay, who will follow Ian, is the chair of the Wilson Institute of Canadian History at McMaster University. People will probably know him best here for his wonderful book about 10 or 15 years ago called Rebels, Reds, and Radicals, re-examining Canada's left history. Many will know him for his book with Jamie Smith when he was at Queen's Warrior Nation. And as with Dennis, reinterpreting the history of actually existing democracy, so Ian has famously been working on reinterpreting the liberal order in the making of Canada. By the way, I think that there's some interesting convergences, I thought, as well as tensions between Ian's very famous essay on this in 2000, I think, and Dennis's more recent essay in the 2017 Studies in Political Economy, which involves reinterpreting the history of Canadian politics in a very interesting way. It would be interesting to look at.
Well, I would just like to thank Leo and Greg so much for all the work that you put in on the volume. I should explain that I had a concussion that spring, and it put me back about 6 to 8 weeks in my schedule. So I was working really in a rushed way. I didn't want to miss this opportunity to publish in such an amazing publication, which I've been reading since the 1970s, and this is an honor to be here. At the same time, under the pressure of my concussion, I sort of produced this, I would have to say, somewhat unfocused piece of work, and gave it to Greg and Leo, and they worked miracles with it, and I am immensely grateful. So I think the job of editing a journal like this is often people don't understand just how much work goes into this, and especially in this case, I just felt immensely grateful to all that you put into this. It was wonderful. So after a strenuous rewrite and a lot of work, I think we came up with a much more focused essay. And this essay is about Antonio Gramsci and C.V. Macpherson. And I want to understand how Gramsci and Macpherson can help us understand and also overthrow this oppressive and obscenely unjust system in which we live. I don't imagine Antonio Gramsci needs a lot of introduction to this crowd. I imagine you've heard the name before. I wonder, though, if C. Brock Macpherson, who was a lifelong Torontonian, his dates are 1911, 1987, nonetheless, I wonder even to a Toronto left audience if Macpherson might need a word of introduction. So I will just say a few words about him. I mean, he taught almost all his academic life at U of T. His big book was Possessive Individualism of 1962, and that was a book that took on the thought of John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, basically the sacred heroes of the liberal tradition, sacred theorists, and Macpherson went after them and really said how much their seemingly abstract political theory was all about property, property rights, and this, he saw them as prefiguring the long, long evolving bourgeois revolution. Well, that really went over like a lead balloon among political theorists, many of them, and another sort of way of saying who is a political theorist to say they're often liberal ideologues. And these political theorists spent basically the next 3 decades trashing Macpherson. So the person who everybody was citing in the 60s became somebody who almost was a rite of passage for political theorists to denounce and really run over in the 1980s. And I go after in the essay, and we'll also go after the book that I'm writing, which is tentatively called A New Method of Liberty, Antonio Gramsci, C.V. Macpherson, and the Next Left. I really want to go after the people that essentially put Macpherson to one side, often with, I thought, very unfair arguments and very, very limited ones that today don't seem very pertinent. So the big line about Macpherson is that he was a dogmatic Marxist. Going back over the papers, going over Real World of Democracy, which is a terrific, really resonates with your interest. Going over his correspondence with Pierre Trudeau, in which he urges Pierre to, well, he says, I agree with the War Measures Act, but couldn't you sort of soften it a bit? Going over his role at trying to tamp down student radicalism at U of T, bring in a very sort of softer version of what the New Left was arguing for. And also in the more serious intellectual way of a McPherson that never really wrestles with the labor theory of value, dialectical theory in any of its various modes. He never said, I just don't get dialectical theory. Had a very limited engagement with Marxist historiography apart from Christopher O'Hill. It just doesn't add up to me that he says Marxist. Rather, I think the core of McPherson is his liberalism, a radical liberalism. A liberalism pushed to, what McPherson would say is his logical conclusions. McPherson is basically saying to liberals today, he's saying to them, okay, John Stuart Mill, great guy, love him to bits. Not so much the liberals that came before that, who were far more dodgy on questions of property. But at least with John Stuart Mill, you're starting to get this idea of the developmental individualism and how the state has an obligation to help people develop. Okay, love you to death, liberals, but haven't you noticed the contradiction after contradiction in which you stumble? Haven't you noticed, for example, in today's world that you're willing to shed all of these tender tears for the LGBTQ community? How touching, how moving. And in the very next breath, you're telling us about these mouth-watering deals with the Saudis. Again and again and again, you are able to put it together in your mind, this reverence for human rights and this passion for property, for acquisition, for material gain at any cost. And that, McPherson says, is almost your core contradiction. You have brought this tradition of freedom, which he so greatly respected, and you have immersed it, you've intertwined it with possessive individualism, with acquisition, with a capitalist social order that makes a mockery of the values of liberalism. So, in drawing from his mentor R.H. Tawney, in a sense providing us a highly theoretical version of the CCF tracts that he was so ardently reading in the 1930s and 1940s, especially that CCF tract, Democracy Needs Socialism. McPherson is, in a sense, arguing for the brilliance, the excitement, the cultural value, the enduring contribution of liberalism, and arguing against those who have so gravely undermined and tarnished their tradition. It needs to be liberated. Liberalism needs to be liberated from the liberals. We need to haul back the whole idea of rights from those who have made a mockery of them and really made them basically a code word for property rights. So when McPherson takes up this theme of property rights, he heretically says, well, we have to rethink property right down to its foundations. And this is where he seems to almost wonderfully counterintuitive. He looked at these demonstrations, say here in Toronto, when people were marching with signs saying, human rights, not property rights. And McPherson's rebuttal was saying, well, you know, I think human rights are property rights. That is, he imagined a property right was that the right not to be excluded from the means of labor and what the means of labor could procure you. It was the property right not to be excluded from adequate housing. And under the 21st century conditions of authoritarian liberalism, which is the term I prefer for neoliberalism, this question of the property right to have adequate housing, the property right to have clean water, the property right not to be excluded from affordable post-secondary education. These, in McPherson's reading of property, these are all property rights. Don't give up on property rights, radicalize it. That is the McPherson drive. So not only might Marxists and radical liberals start to have useful conversations with each other if they start to get into this McPhersonite way of thinking, but they also might be able to forge dramatically new forms of praxis. What useful intellectual and political work might the McPhersonian concept of property be, i.e. the human property right not to be excluded from the means of labor? What useful work might that do when we're trying to encourage people who consider themselves middle class to rethink their whole way of conceiving private property. Canada, in my estimation, and in McPherson's, is deeply imbued with the middle class ethos. One of McPherson's books that he never got to write, he was plotting it out in the 80s, was called Marx for the Middle Class. I think McPherson would have been a very useful person in our contemporary conversations about who is in the middle class. Yes, we'll take this category seriously because we have to. It's so socially diffused, even though it kind of makes us gag when politician after politician after politician, including certain New Democrats, go on and on and on about how we just love the middle class. Well, you know, give it some rigor, give it some analytical edge. How we miss McPherson in this discussion. So we might have time, if we armed ourselves with McPherson, to have these more useful discussions with the multitude of liberal middle-class Canadians who have to be transformed by the revolutionary left if we are going to have a new Canada. Or if we attend to a point made so well by Leo in his 1980s works on McPherson, Marxists need to incorporate those elements of liberal democratic theory of the state that can be found consistent with a non-market classless society. I'm quoting from Leo. I think that is also a genuine insight. How might there not be here a new way of thinking how such grassroots struggle can find their way into democratic party politics? Might there not be inherent in Gramsci's rethinking of democracy and McPherson's rethinking of property an element useful to the long war of position against capitalism that will confront us, and it will confront us if we're lucky for the remainder of the 21st century. So thanks very much to Leo again and Greg for all their stunning editorial work. They are stalwarts in the struggle and pillars of one of the English-speaking left's greatest repositories of intelligence and courage, the Socialist Register, a source of inspiration for the people's struggle.